All right, welcome everybody to Mindful Mondays. My name is Carrie Kelly. I'm with Citizen Well, and today we have a very special practice to share with you. First and foremost, Mindful Mondays was designed to democratize well-being, because we believe that well-being and this practice shouldn't be a privilege, and so it was intended to really help create a community of practice so that we can all be united in our commitment to this moment in the world and to the work of self-responsibility and accountability, so that we can show up in the best way possible and meet the challenges of this moment. This moment in particular is a difficult one, as we all know, and so today, in addition to our meditation with Angel Kyoto Williams, we're going to be doing 9 minutes of collective silence for Charleston, followed by a community conversation really about how to relate and respond to this moment and to the challenge of racism and white supremacy and systemic violence. And so this is really what this kind of practice was designed for. It was designed to help us really bridge the inner work with the way in which we can show up most effectively in the world today. And so I just want to thank you all for being here and welcome you. I want to just really quickly introduce Angel Kyoto Williams. She is a great member of this community. She is also a sensei in the Japanese Zen tradition. She wrote an incredible book called Being Black, Zen and the Art of Living with Fearlessness and Grace. And she is also, to me, a great teacher and a great friend, and I'm grateful to have her here with us today. So without further ado, Angel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. So welcome, everyone. As Carrie said, we're going to bring our attention to the holding some space for Charleston and in the form of 9 minutes of silence, but we're going to begin by continuing our series of Mindful Mondays, the instructions that I've been giving and the brief meditation that goes along with that, and then from there we'll transition. So we'll just jump right in. So in the last 2 weeks, I've been giving this 4-line instruction so that we have something to work with by the end of the time we can deepen into each practice that is involved in our overall meditation, those practices being first the practice of the body, then the practice of the breath, and finally the practice of the mind. And we work with that. Then there's a final practice, which you'll find out when you come back next week. There's a final practice, and we're doing that in a sort of combination of an ancient text, using 4 lines from that to correlate with centering, because most of what we are doing is being out in the world, and that requires our ability to not just be able to get it together and keep ourselves together when we're on a cushion, but actually to be able to respond in the moment. And centering is a way to do that, to figure out how is it that we come back to ourselves, and how is it that we make that related to our time on the mat and on the cushion, so that we don't have this gap between a meditation practice, a mindfulness practice, and showing up in the world, that there's some kind of oasis of calm somewhere that we go and get respite. That's nice, but the real deep practice is to be able to bring that meditation, that peace, that oasis of calm into the chaos of our everyday lives. That practice, being able to do that, begins to alter the way that we actually experience our day-to-day lives, and so even the notion of chaos begins to change. But many people are stuck in a dichotomy, and that's what we really want to try to do here with this instruction, stuck in a dichotomy of expecting that what's going to happen is that they will arrive at some place of awakening or arrive at some place of freedom when they're free of pain, when they're free of challenge, when they're free of discomfort. And that's actually not what awakening and liberation is about. Liberation is actually about the choice to show up and to bring liberation into all of your experience, and so into your joys and into the things that you want, you desire, you hope for, your aspirations, but also into your suffering, your pain, your discomfort. And that's part of what we're going to show up with here today. So the 4-line instructions, again, just to remind you, are first of all to sit upright. And to sit upright is to really take our seat and to recognize that we have a place, and that in doing this, taking our seat, we are choosing to show up for ourselves and show up on behalf of others. So to sit upright is the first instruction. The next instruction is to press our ears against our shoulders, and we create a width and a breadth that opens our chest and exposes our heart, so that our practice is not one in which we're closing down and hiding ourselves from people, but rather choosing to really face life as it is and to expand ourselves into relationship with others, first beginning with the space around us, so that we can acclimate and understand that we are space and we're part of the space, as rather than being separate from it. And then extending ourselves further outward to maybe the people that are in the room around you, or maybe the people that are just outside, or if people aren't nearby, extending your sense of relationship into your communities and the people that you love, but also extending yourself into relationship with the people that you are challenged by, the people that make you uncomfortable, the ideas and the situations that make you uncomfortable. So to broaden into relationship is to actually be in contact with one's reality, to be in contact with life, to understand ourselves as not separate from the space, not separate from nature, not separate from the planet, not separate from other people. So this practice of broadening extends us into the space. And then next we press our nose against our navel. That means a dynamic tension of pressing our crown towards the sky and rooting our belly down low, where our breathing is going to rest low and slow. And in lengthening our body in this way, we express our inherent dignity. And I say this word inherent dignity because that is to remind us that that dignity belongs to us and it cannot be taken away. It is inalienable. It is something that is part of us and who we are simply because we are. And there's no way in which we have to measure up in order to be able to express our dignity. It's simply a choice of whether we are expressing our dignity in any given moment. It's not something that people can give to us. It's not something that people can take away, but rather what we choose to express. And finding ourselves, having taken our seat, extending into relationship and lengthening into our own dignity. Finally, we can give one full out breath. And again, we say that we begin with giving rather than taking a breath, offering what it is that we have fully and completely. So in finally giving this one full out breath, we are left now with the most subtle of the practices, which is the practice of the mind. So what exactly are we doing here when we are working with mind, having settled the body, having regulated the breath? What we want to do ideally is to find what I call just a point. And we've talked about that in the previous meditations, that your breath is often a point that people choose and that you choose because your breath is always with you. And so having chosen the breath as point, you want to see that everything that is not the point, not the focus of your meditation, is in this huge basket of other than point. So as you sit with your own breath and noticing a place that you can locate your breath becomes the point of your focus, the point of your attention, the point of your love. And for this time that you choose this, everything outside of the point is other than point. And the action, the choice, the practice of meditation is simply about choosing to come back to point whenever you find yourself other than point. So many of us get caught up with thinking that meditation is, on the one hand, definitely not the noisy mind, the distractions, the irritations, the complaints, the wishing things were different than they were, than they are in front of us, wishing people that are different. Clearly, meditation is not thinking about the food that you're going to eat later. It's not worrying about the deadline while you're actually doing your practice. But the surprising thing for many people is neither is meditation some kind of static, quiet mind in which nothing is moving or happening. Meditation is simply the choice to return to point whenever you find yourself other than point. So as long as you can choose to come back to point, you are actually successfully practicing mindfulness and meditation. So we'll take a few moments to really deepen into that practice and notice for ourselves the rise and fall of our breath. Maybe at the point of the nostril, maybe in the chest. Or maybe you feel it in your belly. It doesn't really matter what you choose as the point, simply that you choose a point. And as we feel the breath beginning to settle, many times our personality can become uncomfortable with the silence, and so it looks for an escape route. And maybe we begin to think about itching on our shoulder, the discomfort in our low back. What other places we could be, and should we actually be here? All of this is other than point, and so we simply pick our attention up and bring it back to the point of our breath. Perhaps you're thinking about the argument you had last night. That is other than point. So simply picking the attention up and bringing it back to point. Perhaps you're wondering what time it is. So noticing that is also other than point, and picking your attention up and bringing it back to point. Perhaps you notice anxiety, sadness, irritation, lust. All of these are other than point. So finally, picking your attention up and bringing it back to point. Ending with one out breath once again. You have successfully completed, if you chose to come back to point, you have been successful at meditation, and you can bring this time to a close. So thank you. Now we will begin a 9-minute period of silence, and you can hold that silence in any way that you choose, perhaps continuing a meditation, perhaps it's centering prayer, perhaps it's prayer that is inward, perhaps it's just simply being in the space. We'll begin our 9 minutes now. Thank you all for your practice.
So thank you to Angel for that really poignant practice. I want to just take a moment to transition us into this next part of our session together. You know, our practice informs how we engage, and in particular, how we relate and respond to this moment in time, to the massacre in Charleston, to one another. And so this space that we're holding in this moment is really intended to be an open community conversation that reflects all of the many voices and points of view of this community. And I also want to name that who is here and who is participating is not representative of the whole community. And I think by acknowledging that in some way we include those who are not with us. I also want to thank all of those of you who are joining us and who reached out to ask to be a part of this conversation. I'm grateful that you are here with us, and I'm hopeful that we can have a productive and conscious and compassionate conversation about this moment and about what it is to be in community and what it is to take action together. I want to just throw it over to Kate really quickly, who's just going to give some instructions around how everybody else can chime in via chat so that we can hear your voices and get your questions.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Angel. So hi, everybody. My name's Kate, and I'm an organizer with Citizen Well, and I just want to bring your attention to the chat box that's over on the right side of your screen, and invite you, as we are processing and talking together over the next half an hour, to feel free to chime in, to add any questions. Depending on how kind of lively the conversation is and what direction it goes, we're going to do our best to integrate your questions into the conversation and to sort of address your comments. But at the very least, we also have the chat box there so that we can participate together, and we really want, as Carrie said, this to be an engaging and inclusive conversation. So even though a few of our friends that were able to be here on camera this morning sort of have the floor, we want you to be able to be engaged through the chat box there, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. So thanks for being here. And back to you, Carrie.
So I'm just going to, I guess, kick off the first question, and then it's really an open space for people to chime in and ask questions. And I think, you know, the question that has really been sitting with me in my own practice and in my own process around this moment has to do with how do we find the words? How do we find the words to speak about what happened? And I have been noticing just all of the different narratives that come across our feed, all of the different stories that are being told about the Charleston massacre, even the way in which that incident has been described. You know, some are calling it a gun control issue, some are calling it a mental health issue, some are calling it white terrorism, systemic racism, and in my own process, you know, I think what I want to admit is the way in which I have felt a tendency to smooth over the hard edges of this event, right, and to accommodate, softening my language so as not to make people uncomfortable, and how in doing that, how trying to make this feel more palatable to others, I really am doing a disservice to this moment. So I guess that's the question I sort of want to seed to kind of start this conversation, which is how do we find the words and how do we tell the right story?
Yeah. So I think that there's, I think part of the challenge is, right, to be thinking about, like, what's the right story and kind of being really rigorous about naming exactly what happened and seeing how that holds up to other things that have happened and how we change the story right? And so if you change the characters in the story, and if you make the shooter Muslim, for sure this would have been an act of terrorism. If you change the story and change the characters, and the characters were the people that were shot were white, that number of people being shot at one time in this country is referred to as a massacre. And yet the meme around it has simply been shooting. And so I think that there's a deep discomfort that exists in our society about naming racism and white supremacy for what it is, because even with the blatant comments, this is not a situation where we're unclear about what the shooter's intentions were. We're not unclear about the nature of his at least chosen background and what he was up to and thinking about. He named these things, and yet still there's a reluctance to name this for what it is. And as you said, Carrie, I think that what that does is, on the one hand, the compulsion to make things easier for people really denies the horrible pain of the families and community and victims, world, right? It really denies it to say, I'm going to soften for my own sense of comfort, because really it's not. Whenever we're softening things, quote unquote, for other people's comfort, it's actually we're softening for our comfort, right? We're concerned about the confrontation and where it is that we'll have to show up and where we'll have to stand if we name things for what they are. And if you aren't clear about what it is for you, the important thing to do is to get educated and to really do some rigorous analysis around how it is our country shows up differently when we, the sort of emphasis on, like, he's a young man. And for instance, when young black men are, we're not talking about them as young. We're simply talking about them if they're shooters. They just become like the shooter. They just become a black man. We're not concerned about their age. So all of these things are kind of food for thought, and to particularly take it into our practice, because I think that ultimately what practice is about clear seeing, right? It's about clear seeing and being in relationship with reality, and not with our distortions, and not with our distractions, and not with our discomfort, but rather recognizing that discomfort and choosing to be in relationship with the reality that we find ourselves in. And until America does that, white supremacy will continue to reign and destroy this country and destroy everything that is possible, not just for people of color and for black people, but for white people too.
Angel, that's talking about clear seeing that resonates a lot with me, because I think there's such a motivation to not see clearly, coming from a place of privilege. As a white person, I'm very invested in not seeing this clearly, because if I can say and accept that this, of course, is a deeply racially motivated massacre, and not only that, but what he did is an expression of a larger white culture, and that it's not just, he wasn't operating by himself. For me to clearly see that is to put my identity at risk, and to put it feels like my whole self is on the line now, because now I'm complicit in it. And I think for me, the clear seeing involves first me clearly seeing how many obstacles have been put up to me being able to see this situation clearly. So even being able to see myself clearly, I'd say, before I can even think about seeing this event in any clear way.
Yeah. I feel like, Abe, that the sense of, like, putting one's identity, on the line, and what you said about being able to that your own identity is in jeopardy. It's, oftentimes people talk about, are sort of trying to get out of the notion of being racist. And, from my vantage point, the fact is that if you're not being anti-racist, then you're being racist. You're actively being racist. So it's complicit at a level that is, in fact, many ways much more dangerous than the people that are overt. Anyone else? Yeah.
Hi, Angel. This is Melody. I'll speak to that because I feel like I am part of that that people that is being racist and not being anti-racist in the way of taking direct action enough. I don't feel like it's enough to take action in conversation that I happen to be having amongst the people that I know in my own network. I'm really curious about how can we, as I'll just ask for me, how can I be anti-racist? What are action steps that I can be taking to actively be part of the solution that's loving and compassionate in this moment?
Yeah. I think that we're actually a little like my friend and colleague and Dharma brother Lama Rod Owens was saying the other day that we get pretty dramatic about this, in the sense that there's this idea that we have to like run out into the street. And actually, I think that what's really missing for most of, I want to say, white privilege and white supremacy supporting America, which includes people of color, right? Okay, so white supremacy is not just being held up by white people. White supremacy is being held up by people of color too. When you are in witness of it and you're not interrupting it, then you are actually holding it up. And so I think it's actually what is not happening is that people are not actually addressing it in their conversations, as Carrie spoke to, right? Not actually naming themselves white actively and bearing the consequences, the burdens, the discomfort, the realities of privilege being reflected back at you by actually naming yourself as white, but also interrupting in conversations and situations that are happening in front of you. Like, this is actually, it's these small acts. It's not actually about just running out and doing protest, because there's also having love for yourself. And this is a process. And I often say to people that, for white folks, y'all are just discovering that you're white, and like folks of color have known you're white all along. And so, and we've borne the burden and the pain of that contrast of what whiteness is and what white skin privilege has done. And I say white skin privilege because many people for instance, Jewish descent or Europeans have come recently to the country, will often have a conversation and want to introduce a conversation about the challenges they have had, the struggles that their families had. And I don't want to take away any of that. But the fact is that privilege is conferred upon you for the mere fact of your skin. And that doesn't change no matter how you choose to identify inside of that white skin. And that doesn't change even which is true for black people too. Like, I don't have to identify as black, but I'm going to get treated as black no matter what. I'm actually mixed. But no one thinks about my Cherokee heritage. No one thinks about my Scottish, Irish heritage. They think about the color of my skin, and somewhere in the spectrum of there, I'm black. So I think the main interruption is to name whiteness and to name white supremacy and racism for what they are, and stop coddling each other and stop coddling yourselves.
We have a comment here, thank you, Angel, from Laura Sharkey, and I would love to hear a little bit more about a point that she brings up in the idea of coddling. And so Laura brought up the point here talking about healing and kind of the focus on healing coming through the tragedy of this very active racist massacre. And she talks about a concern that maybe we need to focus a little bit less on healing, except for those who are closest to the tragedy, because at times the idea of healing from an event like this can be used sort of as a spiritual bypass to sort of get out of engaging. So I'd love to hear from any of the folks here on the call and from Angel, like, are there ways in which you, as somebody with one foot in the well-being community, one foot in the justice community, how do we affirm the need for healing, but also not allow that to be used as kind of a spiritual cop-out for dealing with reality?
I can, there's a great model that I have taken from people who have experienced grief, and to sort of move it into this arena. And so it's almost like a concentric circles, right? So that if someone has experienced a loss at the very center of the circle, right, you pour love into the circle that's closest to the center, right? And you talk about your experience outwardly, right? So if someone has had a loss, you pour love in as people are closer to that loss, and you deal with your loss outward to the people who are farther away from that loss. And I think that's also true here, which is that people who are closer to that experience, people whose identities, their lives are really under threat, that healing and love gets poured in, and the attention for me about talking to folks who are farther from that experience, I can get, my love gets a little bit more edgy, right? It gets a little bit more, a lot more truth-telling. There's a lot more education going outward and a lot more love and care and tenderness going inward. And that's the best way I can explain it. But I think, again, healing isn't pushy all the time, right? It isn't always love and fluffy. Keeping people from doing harm is healing, right? That's been true for me. Like, stopping myself from self-harm and outward harm is actually a path of healing. And so I think reframing how we think of love, and not squishy cuddly all the time, it's true, part of it, right? But also how we think of healing is that ending harm is healing. And that's, I think, part of how we think about it.
I also want to say that it's really important, you know, that I totally agree, and I'm so appreciative of the naming of that potential and the, like, knee-jerk pass of, like, healing. I don't know if you all have a screen share. If you can share. I made this. You know, what are those little, you know, graphic icons to share with people, and it says here it is. I'll just pop that up there. Because what often happens is that people, when tragedies happen, I get people that, like, send me their love, and they're telling me about how how unfortunate it is, you know, for the Black community and what they're experiencing, and, you know, whether they're saying the Black community or they're saying it to me, it's all talking about my suffering. And white folks need to get clear that, like, this is your suffering and this is your work to do. And you actually have to go on the front lines of your own struggle and your own pain and your own suffering. This racism, this white supremacy, people of color bear a certain kind of overt burden, but the history and legacy of slavery, of race and racism, of Jim Crow era, like, all of this has a profound effect on white America. It's part of, directly connected to the amount, the significant significantly higher incidence of mental illness, the significantly higher incidence of I forgot the, you know, word for it, but, you know, where people kill their own families, the significantly higher presence of serial killer and psychopathy. There's a reason for that, right? It's not just people are, like, born kind of off, and it's sort of like in this increased way. We have, like, created a culture that is allowing, like, a viral illness to exist in a people and express itself because of this untended to pain. So I want people to work with allyship, but I want them to work with their allyship by working with their own stuff and their own pain, and seeing where you're cutting off your heart, seeing where you're cutting off your sense of relationship to people and to planet, and destroying things because you can't face the legacy of what it means to carry that burden and to actively engage undoing it.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of comment on that, Angel. Thank you for saying that, because I think, and I've spoken to a couple of you guys about this as well, you know, this idea of, you know, confronting our own stuff, and not just individually, but really in the context of relationship and with one another, because I think part of that spiritual bypass sometimes is like permission to retreat into the safety of our own world, because to be in relationship is tricky, even with, you know, our communities and the people that are closest with us. And so I guess the question that I kind of want to name is like, how do we do that? Like how, because I guess like I want to say that I am prepared to be uncomfortable, inconvenienced, feel awkward and clunky and clumsy and fuck up all over the place in order to lean into this conversation, because I do think that is what this moment is calling us to do, and that's what the practice is calling us to do. And so I guess the question I want to pose is like, you know, one of the people in our community, Marianne Manilov, says, you know, how can we call one another up and not out? How do we be fierce about disrupting what you said before, Angel, the conversation, but also be compassionate and loving in the way in which we are all in a kind of really clumsy, clunky moment of really trying to lean in and learn?
That's a great question, and one I'm definitely struggling with. I think for me, it's coming through learning to, and not just have compassion for the sake of compassion, but like actually seeing that it makes sense that I have these blinders, that it makes sense that I want to fight back against the implication that this is a racially based moment. It makes sense that I want to fight back that I'm actually that my story has something to do with the murderer's story. I have deep training in denying the existence of privilege and systems of privilege, because I've got all these boxes checked in terms of what privileges I bear. So I have deep training from birth in not seeing them and trying to invalidate suggestions that those systems impact the way I look at the world. So I think the biggest danger, once we realize that the work is with each other and not trying to, and that our particular work is not trying to help black people heal through this, but actually to work with other white people. But the danger is that we get vicious, that I want to be better as the better anti-racist than other people. And that's white supremacy working itself through me, even in the realm of white anti-racist efforts. So learning to really understand, like believing it makes sense that I am this way, that I have all these blinders, that I'm fighting back in this way that's defensive and fragile, so that when I'm trying to talk to my own people, it really is coming from a place of deep understanding. I understand why we are this way. And as Angel said, we need healing from that, because that fragility that has manifested itself in us is quite debilitating. And it may not be materially debilitating, but it's intellectually debilitating, spiritually debilitating, socially debilitating. And so if I can come from that standpoint where I'm not just trying to be compassionate to be more effective, but actually learning to look inside myself to understand that training, then I'm coming to the conversation with true compassion that's born out of my own experience.
Abe, the one thing that I would add is that it definitely makes sense, and I think that is really a compassion practice, right? Is to just be to step into the presence of like being kind with yourself, in that sense of this makes sense. I would say that it makes sense not just because you were trained that way from you were born. You were trained that way through generations. That actually exists through generation upon generation upon generation for that denial to be there. And so on the one hand, you're kind with yourself in recognizing that it totally makes sense, but also fierce with yourself in terms of unhooking yourself from that place that is holding you back, that's keeping your awakening, that's keeping your liberation abated. Like you just cannot wake up, and all of the people that are thinking that they're engaging in spiritual awakening and not dealing with the legacy of racism and their own white supremacy and their own internalized racism, they're really fooling themselves. I say it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility.
Thank you. I just want to bring everybody's attention also to the chat box. There's been some incredibly thoughtful, beautiful reflections and questions that are coming in. And we won't be able to go over everything that everyone's contributed, so make sure that you get a chance to scroll through it. And I do want to lift up one Hanson. Thanks for contributing, Andrea. And Andrea says that she's a Black stay-at-home mom and lives in a predominantly white neighborhood and finds herself avoiding conversations on race, partially because it's uncomfortable, but also distancing from white friends because what bothers and affects her seems so far from their lives. And she says she finds, which I think is really a generous way to put it, Andrea. And she's asking, how does one navigate in this type of situation? So listening to Andrea's question here, how does she respond as a woman of color being so impacted by these things but feeling like that this seems like so far from their lives? So any feedback on that?
You know, I would love to hear what white folks would say about like what you would want in that situation. I think that might be helpful to hear that perspective.
She's asking what should she do in that situation? I just want to make sure I understand the question.
Yes.
That's right.
She's asking what she should do, and I mean, of course, I could make some suggestion, but I think it's also helpful to hear, right, from white folks that have various degrees of comfort around like having this conversation. What are some suggestions about, you know, I'm not inside of whiteness in the same way, and so what are some effective ways in which that kind of subject can be broached? And you know, effective does not mean comfortable, and I really think that that's the most important thing that we have to acknowledge, is that in order to, you know, this is not comfortable. This is not comfortable for anyone, and so if what we're waiting for is for the time that it will be comfortable and the time that it will be easy, we're going to be waiting a really, really long time. And in the meantime, people are dying.
I think, I mean, I'll just offer in my own practice, you know, is one of really embracing the I don't know. The practice of like, I don't know, how does this make you feel, and asking the question that I don't know, and being being genuinely curious about the answer and not making assumptions, or trying to like navigate around or bypass the more uncomfortable thing that needs to be spoken. And so that's something that I've been trying in my own practice, is just asking questions, genuine questions, and being willing to say I don't know, and I'm not sure how this makes you feel, and I'd love to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I think she's not asking about like what white folks should, how they ask the question, but rather like how is it that she as a woman of color, you know, communicate, like you're around me, I have a relationship with you, and I'm suffering, I'm experiencing, real pain and hurt from this, and yet this is far from you. So I'm asking you as white folks to say something about what gets to you. How do we reach you?
It feels like this is so not her job. That's why I'm hesitating. It's like, talk about somebody who is in an uphill battle, being a person of color in a majority white community, to try to figure out how to engage with white people on a level that they'll be able. I mean, I understand the dilemma. I don't feel like I can possibly suggest to a woman of color in that situation how it is to engage, because first of all, like I said, I'm programmed to not hear it. Even if I'm conscious of it, I'm still like, and let alone in a majority white environment. I don't know. I would love to, I really wish I could offer something, but I guess the best thing I could do is like, is there a single white person there that has a level of awareness or analysis that this can be passed on to in your community, somebody, a white person that you do trust, because this is, I feel very strongly that that is not this person's job, and even if it was, it's an impossible task.
Yeah, and I think that was the thing I think I was trying to get at, is how can we unlock that conversation?
Yeah, I think the reality too is, though, I think it's also that we are in relationship as people of color. We're in relationship with white folks, and so we're having this experience. And I would say to you, Andrew, that truth works, and truth is, and what I have said to people is like, I'm really suffering right now.
Ayo?
I think
Just simply dropping into that, like I'm really suffering right now. There's this has happened, and it really has impact. I know that I woke up one day and I realized that I wasn't safe, and I had that conversation with Carrie. I said, Carrie, one day I woke up after one of the non-indictments, and I realized that I wasn't safe in the way that I had imagined myself safe for many, many years. And that was where the conversation started.
I think I can handle this from two places. One, as a white person, if I want to be in deep relationship, then I have to find the ability to hear the hard things, right? And I have to hear from somebody that, like, look, I'm hurting, and this conversation on the corner isn't helping me. And and so that's part of it, is actually just challenging the relationship, because relationships grow with some tension, right? They grow in this way of figuring out where the resilience is. And the hard part is sometimes there's not resilience, and that's just true. I will say, as somebody who's had to have conversations with folks about privileges I don't have, I've had the experience of having the conversation to the extent I can have it, and then knowing that there's somebody else that's much more similar in identity to the person I'm trying to talk to, that I can pass them off to, right? So I've had to say, like, look, straight, white, non-trans guy, I don't know what else to say. Like, you've got all I've got. Here's this reverend who's a white, straight, cis guy, and he can have this conversation with you, because I don't know what to do. And that's true. Like, I have the conversation I'm capable of having to the point where my safety is no longer on the line. And when I get to that wall, I hand them off with love. I'm like, I got no more words. And I think that's the best thing I have to offer, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So we're going to bring this time together to a close. I want to really thank everyone for being here and for showing up for this call, including the people that will show up. We have many people that have registered, and we know they can't be on the call live, so I want to also address those of you that are going to be watching the call afterwards, watching the replay afterwards, and just showing up for yourself, to recognize that this is showing up for yourself, that the choice, as I spoke about in the meditation, that the choice to show up is actually itself an act of love. And it's an act of love for yourself, and no matter how uncomfortable it made you, how awkward you felt, or how maybe rageful you felt, that the showing up is actually what's important, and then the situation unfolds from there. None of us have the answers to this. There are no clear answers. There are certainly no easy answers. There are definitely no uncomfortable answers. But we have to get in the room together, and we have to be in each other's face and in each other's hearts and work from a place of love. And the last thing I'll say is that if you're in a situation in which your engagement in this conversation is not about being invested in love, get out of the conversation. It's not where you should be having it. Yeah.
Thank you, Angel. We express so much gratitude to you for holding this space with us for the entire month, and especially for taking us on this journey and conversation of this moment that we're in, that is just sort of an odd that this country has always been in trying to figure out how are we going to resolve and move forward our unjust history and oppressive history in terms of racism. And so thank you for that space. I want to thank chimed in on video and also on chat for being part of this conversation. And also just to bring folks' attention to resources this year. I'm sure you can also feel this is like the very, very, very tip of the iceberg. And as Carrie mentioned at the beginning, there's also only a very certain set of voices that have been here on this call. So one of the things that we prepared to share with you is a resources list. For those of you who are here live, I just pasted it into the box. And for those who, you can look down in the description of this video, the link is there. If you click on that resources list, I just there for your own continuing development and help and support with friends. There's a couple of links there to learn more about white supremacy. There's videos on systemic racism and lots of readings that might be good resources for conversations and your own personal research. We want to lift up Angel's program that's open for enrollment right now called 27 Days of Change, which can really, really help you dig deeper into your personal transformation and commitment to justice. Very, very highly recommended to dig deeper into that process and sign up for 27 Days of Change with Reverend Angel. The resource there I want to highlight also in relation to the conversation we were having regarding Andrea's question about creating some healing space and seeking support. There's an article there, Self-Care for People of Color, that are dealing with the trauma of living in a racist society. And so that article is there. And there's also a link to donate to support the families of victims and AME Church with funeral costs. So we hope that if we move to give, that's a way that we can support economic in action. And having conversations. And then lastly, we recommend that you get engaged in local actions in your community. Find out what's going on. Show up, even if it feels uncomfortable. Bring friends, bring family, bring somebody from your yoga class. Like, even if you've never done something like that before, find out who in your community is addressing these issues and show up, even if it's comfortable, right? And then lastly, we want to invite you to come back with us on Mondays. And this is really a space for us to continue to experience personal transformation and translate that into action to form our world. So we hope you'll be back with us. You can sign up and enroll at citizenwell.org/practice. And for those of you who haven't clicked the link, we're going to redirect you to the 9 Minutes for Charleston resource page immediately in this call. So thank you everyone so much for being here, and we hope to see you next week on Mindful Mondays.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you all.
Thank you.